So far in the course, we've heard a lot about the particular food practices that are actually happening in society today. And one thing that we've already started to do is to form some basic moral judgments about which ones are good and which ones are bad. As it turns out, philosophers for over 4,000 years have been trying to systematize this kind of project, saying which actions are right morally and which actions are wrong morally. So to motivate getting into some of the details of what philosophers have said about this, let me just make an analogy. Suppose you went to the doctor and the doctor diagnosed you with a certain illness. Let's say, for example, that you had arthritis in your knee. And you asked the doctor why, and they said, "I don't know, I just feel like that." You probably wouldn't go back to that doctor. Well, it's the same when it comes to making moral decisions. If someone says this action is right, and you ask them why, and they just go, "I don't know," you probably shouldn't trust that person's moral judgments. What philosophers have been trying to do is answer that why question. Why is it that certain actions are right and certain actions are wrong? So let's try and systematically step through thinking through a similar kind of analogy with an example that hopefully you haven't encountered, but that it's important to think about. Suppose you're walking out in a park or a field near a lake, and you happen upon someone in an unfortunate situation. It appears that they're drowning in the middle of a lake. You notice that there is a boat at the shore. Now, here's a question. Is it morally right or wrong to row the boat out, pull the person in, and save them? I think most of us would probably give the answer, it's morally right. It's required even for you to row out and save this person. Well, as we think about it in more detail, we see that some really important factors are at play here. So for example, consider the fact that maybe the boat has a small hole in it. You think it might leak a little bit, but you know you're putting yourself at some risk. How do you balance that risk to yourself with the duty that you seem to have to save this person who's in trouble? So that seems like one factor that's at play. But let's also think about why in the first place you would be inclined to save a person. It seems as though it's something like a good consequence of an action that some other person is saved. So what makes some consequences of our actions good and others not good? So far we have two factors. We have good consequences of our actions that seem to be at play, also risks to ourselves. Another factor that you might think about is the rights of property owners. So you might say, well, it's someone else's boat. I don't have rights to use that for my own purposes. In this case, you might think their rights are trumped, but we can imagine similar situations in which they aren't. So just to fill out the situation a little bit more, suppose that the boat is an extraordinarily expensive antique boat that can't be piloted by anyone that isn't an expert, or else it will sink. You might think maybe the risk isn't worth it. Maybe there's another way of saving the person that you should try and explore. So far we've seen that there are at least three factors in our moral decision making. One is good consequences of our moral decisions. Another is risk to ourselves as actors in the world. The third was something like property rights. And to this you might add a fourth, which are our personal responsibilities. So suppose that the person drowning in the lake was doing you a favor, trying to go out in the lake. You might think that you have an extra responsibility to go and save them at that point. Another way in which we can get this fourth factor is thinking about maybe this fourth person is a friend or a family member. It seems as though many of us would say we have an extra obligation to help those to whom we're close. So we end up this kind of thought experiment with four clear factors in our moral decision making. And one way of viewing how philosophers have thought about moral theory is trying to balance out these four factors. We'll see that some moral theories try and assimilate all of them to the first factor, good consequences. Those kinds of philosophers are called consequentialists. And in this unit in particular, we'll consider a special form of consequentialism pioneered by the philosophers Bentham and Mill.